Hello and you're welcome to the Big Tech Show with me, Adrian Weckler. Now, Donald Trump has been elected. What does it mean for the world of technology? From a regulatory war, perhaps with the EU, to rule changes about what you can or can't say online on the most popular social media networks. Figures like Elon Musk are now behind the wheel of enormous cultural changes in power. But how and where will they affect us? JJ Clark, let's start with the inauguration itself, because seated behind Donald Trump's family were Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Tim Cook, Google's Sundar Pichai, of course Elon Musk himself, and a few others, all of who had donated $1 million to the inauguration fund. And that was a visceral symbol to the world that what they call the Overton window, that's that term that's used meaning the acceptable political conversation at any one time, has shifted to the right and in favour of Trump. And the tech CEOs seem to be behind it. And there was one really, I don't know if you would say unfortunate or notorious or outrageous incident that summed it all up and that a lot of us are talking about. And that's this very, very bizarre salute that Elon Musk did, where he was jumping around on stage, he was thrashing about, and then he said, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you. And he put his hand on his chest flat, and then he stiff-armed it out on a diagonal at a 45-degree angle, and he grunted as he did so. And it really, really, really did look like the kind of salute that is associated first with, I think they called it a Roman salute, but then far more notoriously, middle of the last century, with fascist salutes and Nazi salutes. And of course the internet went crazy. His own ex, furious rows, did he or didn't he?
Yeah. What do you like? I know we've been critical on the podcast of Musk. Do you think he meant it? Like when he touches his chest, from the bottom of my heart, that makes sense. It is an odd gesture. What do you think?
And he did it twice. This is a really difficult one for me to actually call, because the short answer is I don't know. Now, let's be clear here. This podcast and my reporting in the Irish Independent and Sunday Independent has been fairly relentlessly critical about Elon Musk, particularly on the political and the cultural side. I mean, I've reported, in depth about his nods to what appears to be white nationalism, his reposting of issues that purport to show unfairness to white people, and his obsession with repopulation and his destruction of DEI initiatives, and his support for Tommy Robinson in the UK, who is a racial agitator, his support for the AfD in Germany, who are, it's fair to say that they are far right. And I've been tracking this and, have gotten a lot of grief and aggro from Tesla fanboys over the years for it, because, the two streams mix. I mean, 2 weeks ago, I wrote a column suggesting or asking the question whether if you buy a 2025 Tesla, is that validly seen as potentially a political statement saying that you either support Musk or you're indifferent to what he represents now. So all of that is a very long precursor to say that I've been really, really critical of Elon Musk. And at the same time, I don't know if he meant that. I mean, over the weekend, or over the last few days, I was subject to relentless abuse on Blue Sky for saying that I don't know whether he meant it as a Nazi salute. A lot of people who are, who very passionate about this said, typical media, you're trying to cover up for Elon Musk, which is kind of ironic, but and pointing out, look, it's so obviously a Nazi salute. They were saying it's not that obvious to me that was a Nazi salute, and I have no reason to defend Elon Musk, but there were some defences put on his behalf. Now, the most important one would have been from Elon Musk himself, who hasn't tried to explain it. Instead, he's just kind of mocked his detractors, and he has reposted pictures and videos of figures like, Kamala Harris or Barack Obama or AOC or others who have, in the middle of a passionate speech, ended up with the same gesture. Okay, I don't think quite with the same energy, but he's tried to make the point, I think, or his defenders have, that this is something that, you know, can be part of a natural movement. Other defenders say that, well, if you look at Elon's movements in general, he is on the autism spectrum, and his movements around the stage, they're often very sort of odd, they're uncoordinated.
Erratic,
There was the famous rally, the Trump rally, where he jumped up and down awkwardly, and he was lampooned mercilessly for it. And even on the day itself, he was thrashing around the stage. He was thumping, he was whooping, he was hollering in a very kind of uncoordinated way, quite an unglamorous way. So that argument suggests that him then doing that, putting his hand on his heart and then kind of doing that kind of thank you or salute, even if it does look like a stiff arm salute, because of the context, it may not mean that it's some sort of obvious nod to fascists or to Nazis, okay? Now, that's their argument. It would be really helpful if Elon Musk came out and clarified it and said as such, but instead he's kind of seems to take coy amusement out of the outrage that it causes because he likes being the centre of attention. And what you can say, that it's fairly inexcusable for him not to move to clarify it, because it has already caused real damage insofar as far-right groups in the US and elsewhere are delighted. They're thrilled. They're posting, you know, they're saying things, we are so back, and, you know, all of that sort of stuff. So you could definitely say that he is culpable for that, just as he is culpable for, you know, whipping up so much other stuff on the right and on the far right. But on the simple question of whether Elon Musk meant to do overtly a Nazi salute, a fascist salute, it simply isn't clear that he meant to do that. It's just not clear. And I say that as somebody who has been relentlessly critical of Elon Musk. But the context in which he did it and his autism and other elements, also the absolute next level outrage that would deservedly cause. He's at the inauguration of a president, and someone would consciously do a Nazi. I mean, it's almost inconceivable. Now, if I'm wrong, then this is the most despicable thing to have happened. But from my point of view, I don't know whether he meant that. But it's really hard, even with Elon Musk, it's really hard to think that he did mean that.
Right, and it's hard to know someone else's mind, and you know, he sort of takes sport in the fact that he's getting a lot of attention for it, and then he pushes back by mocking and showing a dancer with his hands extended in a V, and it's similar, and you know, it is like, I think in one sense, his style is not to clarify, though. That he's not going to offer a sort of mea culpa where he says, listen, I didn't know that was offensive to anyone, you know, that you're never going to see
Well,
that.
he loves the attention, he loves the outrage, and he only really kind of takes steps back when he thinks it's going to damage his interests. Like, we did see him eat absolute humble pie after he tweeted that one time a couple of years ago. You have, I think the exact phrase was, you have tweeted the actual truth, and that was in relation to a post which alleged that Jewish people were at best ambivalent or supported immigration into the US because it was helping to thin out the white race. Okay, now this was absolutely scandalous. He apologized for it and he backed down massively, then he went to Israel, and he's been sort of wearing kind of Israeli stuff, and he changed his tune on the Hamas Israeli thing as well. But very rare that he does that. He just won't comment on it, and he won't back down. I mean, I'm not going to rehash them all again, but there are those who would paint a picture of him maybe trying to test the water, but they would point to the fact that, you know, he's obsessed with the Roman Empire. He is genuinely an activist when it comes to, he calls it Western culture. It's a very much a white culture thing. If you add the sum of what he advocates on immigration, it tends to be just against non-white immigration. There is a body of evidence there that points in one direction. But even then, for him to go and pull a Nazi salute, it seems hard to believe.
History will tell, or the future will tell. But I suppose it would be so much on the nose. Even when you talk about Trump supporters, like the idea of the Second World War is still there. Fighting the bad guys. The golden generation. So I would be so surprised.
Yeah. Now, look, I mentioned the Overton window, and Trump himself Musk, they're interchangeable, aren't they? Musk himself has mentioned this, and this is this idea that what was unacceptable or regarded as being unmentionable a few years ago is now mentionable, and you can now bring into normal discourse. And we've seen that on X. The term retardation or retard has now come back seemingly without any consequence. But I want to move it on to the effect of Trump's presidency on other parts of our tech. And we talk about the Overton window, and we talk about what you can and can't say online. And I think nowhere is this better seen than in Meta's content change rules. So a couple of weeks ago, Mark Zuckerberg did this big 3-hour podcast with Joe Rogan. And that was after he himself had put out a video explaining that they were going to change, they were going to get rid of fact checkers. They were going to introduce an X-style community notes system instead. And they were also going to change and get rid of some of their hate speech rules. So according to Meta's rules now, and this goes for Europe as well and Ireland as well as the US, you can now say without fear of violating Meta Facebook's rules that gay people or LGBT people are mentally ill. Okay? That, according to Meta, is now mainstream discourse and allowable and is not outrageous to say that, or at least if it's controversial, it's not outrageous enough to get you sanctioned by Meta. It was before. That's quite a big departure. And there's a few more like that. There's I think they've softened their invective against trans people. You can effectively now say that trans people don't exist without sanction. Okay, that's a big change, because obviously up to now they're seen as a protected category of people. I mean, I think they still are. I mean, we would have guidelines and policies around that.
Just on that, do you think that is kowtowing in the ways of Zuckerberg? He's bringing that in because he knows that it'll be politically favourable, or is it 50% of that, 50% cost cutting?
No, I think it's more the political thing, because the cost to Meta of both fact checkers and anything else to do with content moderation is actually quite small. They don't actually spend that much on fact checkers. I mean, I think I don't know what the figure is. It's a few million or maybe tens of millions at most out of tens of billions. It's very, very small. No, this is a clear sign this is part of a political game that Mark Zuckerberg is playing. The best way to think, I think, of Meta and Mark Zuckerberg is being apolitical and, in the most cynical way possible, defending shareholder value. Probably the same reason that Tim Cook from Apple paid $1 million out of his own pocket to Trump's inauguration fund. This is about representing your corporate interest to the new regime so that they will promote you or advance you, or that they won't penalize you. Okay?
I suppose it's been present in sort of the early 90s with the USSR, where is this a new form of oligarchy? Because you mentioned the inauguration, the tech CEOs were seated in the rotunda in front of the cabinet. Is that like a signal? It's like, this is going to be a tight-knit relationship.
Well, Elon Musk reportedly now will have an office in the West Wing of the White House, close to the president. He was set up for an office in the Eisenhower part of the White House, which is further away. Now he'll be closer to the president than many of Trump's own cabinet. So you read that as a signal as to, who is calling the shots. Now, a lot of this is money-based because, of course, Trump or Musk, I keep mixing the two of them up, Musk donated over $250 million of his own money to Trump's campaign. And it's assumed that there's the promise of more money there as well for the midterms, which would be candidates that Trump would approve of or support, and that can help him pass legislation and, maybe restructure things so that he will have a legacy when he finishes. So I think that's part of it. I think Zuckerberg's along for the ride so that Meta won't be penalised. Up to now, Meta is very unpopular with Trump, don't forget, and Musk as well. So a lot of this is sucking up to Trump and his agenda. But this is leading to a change in the cultural tone online for all of us, but also it's going to lead to a massive clash between Europe and the US, because there isn't much of a sense of regulators or even the public in Europe shifting in the same way the Americans. I mean, you might point to, we'll see with the German election, for example, it's possible to say that there has been a rise in the populist right in many European countries, and maybe that might have an effect. Maybe that might be reflected. Maybe what's going on in America might be echoed in Europe. But absent that, there's certainly no change in sort of the rules or the laws here about what you can say or what you can't say online. So there's going to be a huge clash. I mean, I'm thinking of Meta in Dublin with its, 2,300 people, staff or whatever, and lots of contractors. The head of Meta Ireland is Anne O'Leary, who is former Vodafone Ireland head. Very hard worker, very respected in the tech industry here. She has spent the last decade building up almost a personal professional brand around DEI and diversity, around respecting diversity, promoting diversity. She now has a boss who is basically saying that, DEI is, yesterday's news, and that we shouldn't be paying much heed to it. And from now on, we're going to be a lot more, we need more masculine energy. That's a very difficult position to be in if you're Anne O'Leary, in one sense. Now, she's not responsible for what he says, and she has her role here, but that's the culture and that's the corporate tone that's now coming from the top. That's what Meta now represents. And Meta is a very powerful company, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. It controls and steers huge swathes of our public discourse and our political discourse. So, this is all coming from Trump. From Trump's re-election. It's almost hard to think that if literally 1.5% of people in the States had voted the other way in just 7 states, none of this would be happening.
Right. Yeah. And I'm just interested as well. It's essentially what that represented for me is that it's influence for sale, like that you can buy your seat at the table and then you can play a part into policy or at least nudge Trump in the right direction so that you set up the future that it's more promising for you, just as standard business. But is Trump open to manipulation from the tech side? Because the tech, they've all genuflected. It was sort of, it was on show. It's like that, a bunch of it was almost like children being, reprimanded. It was like, we obviously don't agree with this, but we're here. Everything that we've done in the past contradicts this. Yeah,
there's the alpha and we're the pack now, and we will bow and we will defer to you. I mean, absolutely. So TikTok is a good example. Suji Chu, the TikTok CEO, Singaporean TikTok CEO, was at the inauguration, reportedly. TikTok has spent the last few weeks intensely lobbying Donald Trump personally to try and rescind the ban. And it looks like it may have worked. And they've done it through flattery. They've done it through, I don't know what they've promised. But Trump seems to have brought TikTok back from the brink of a long-term ban in the US. Now, we don't have further details on that yet or what that might look like. He did post about this idea of a 50% stake for the US. It wasn't clear whether it was the US state or a US company. I presume he means a US company. That, of course, would give him the imprimatur to then decide who gets that 50% in the US, which again gives him massive power, not only over the company taking the 50%, but also over Mark Zuckerberg and Meta, because whoever he gives the 50% to will be good or bad for Mark Zuckerberg and Meta. So a way of keeping Meta in check and in terms of his cultural agenda, is by controlling who gets TikTok to control TikTok. So Trump really, at the moment, has almost unprecedented and unfettered culture control over the tech industry in a way that no other civil political leader has exercised before outside China.
Right.
In China, they have total control, or almost total control, over big tech companies there. They can wipe them out in a second. They can promote a rival in a second. It seems that America is catching up there, or it's certainly in a far more similar position than it was 5 years ago.
Is that like a tipping towards a sort of different type of political system where, you know, the president holds more control than they typically would have? And is there any sort of feasibility to the idea that Zuckerberg might be the American to take over TikTok? Could that potentially happen?
It's very hard to imagine that. First of all, because Trump, again, personally does not like Mark Zuckerberg. He spent years trashing Zucker Schmuck, as he has called him. He thinks that Meta spent a long time being biased against Trump. He still has this thing about... there's a long history there, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Mark Zuckerberg will not get his hands on TikTok. There was some suggestion that maybe Elon Musk might be in the frame for taking over TikTok, which would probably suit the Chinese more than anyone else. Because if you're the Chinese, and if let's suppose for a second, and I don't completely go along with this view, but let's suppose for a second that TikTok is a Chinese influence operation. Let's say, if that is the case, and you are China and you are controlling, it must be the US TikTok must be divested, and you have any say in who gets to take it over. Elon Musk getting it is your best case scenario. If you want to rip apart American society, if you want to alienate people from each other even more, if you want to cause riots, if you want to foment absolute discord at a civil scale, giving TikTok to Musk is a far more effective medium-term strategy for the Chinese if you want to disrupt the US as an adversary, than giving it to somebody like, for example, Frank McCourt, who is the Irish-American businessman who is the National Broadband Plan, David McCourt's brother. It's very hard to see Mark Zuckerberg getting any stake in that.
Yeah, and just with the return to TikTok after the ban, whatever it was, 11 hours, 12 hours, people reported that the For You section of the app, that you had to go looking for what you typically would have seen, which sort of suggests, I don't know if it actually is, that the algorithm was turned off, or it's, somewhat less aggressive than it was before. Is that what the future of TikTok would look like if it was in that kind of 50-50 venture style that Trump's positing? Yeah,
it's a really interesting kind of thought process there. So whatever happens, it looks like TikTok in the US might be different to TikTok in Europe. So TikTok obviously has its big base here in Dublin. I meet semi-frequently with executives from that company just to find out what's going on there. But any deal that's done, you would suspect is going to have an algorithmic element to it in terms of what Americans see or do. Now, there are people who just will never be pleased or happy if TikTok remains available in the US. Don't forget, it was passed by both houses of Congress and Senate. Bipartisan, all the way up through the courts. There is a good faith, genuine belief on behalf of many American policymakers and lawmakers that there is an unacceptable Chinese influence on TikTok. Whether or not that's the case, that is their belief. So just because Trump sort of flicks a switch and says, it's okay, I've done a deal with them, they can stay in America, that constituency won't be mollified by that. Now, a TikTok ban is very unpopular in the US. Most ordinary people would actually agree with Trump if he gives TikTok a stay. Because the ban is unpopular. Most people don't see what the big deal is. So it's quite an interesting issue.
Yeah, it's a law that's been enacted. I'm trying to think of there's a senator who's talking about Tom Cotton. So he's a guy out of Arkansas. Mm-hmm. And he's saying the law has been enacted and the only way to reverse it is to create another law where it says it's okay to have TikTok, because it did get that support, and an executive order will only stay the hand. And you have like the likes of Google and Android, they can't lawfully put it up on their app stores anymore.
No. So the suggested way around that, there's two suggestions. One is that an executive order from Donald Trump, among his 200 other executive orders, could intervene to extend the period of time that TikTok has to find a buyer. Now, in theory, he might be able to do that indefinitely. I think there's a 90-day period which is provided for in the law. But the other way that they're suggesting Trump could get around it is by directing the Justice Department and the Attorney General not to prosecute. A very, very rudimentary. And I don't think Apple or Google will be happy with that, because that means that Trump could wake up one morning after an argument with, President Xi in China and decide, no, I've changed my mind on TikTok. That might be the way that Elon Musk and President Trump would like to rule America, but it's not really the way that you could reliably do business if you're Apple or Google and you think you could be prosecuted at any moment, even historically, because the law, as you say, stands. So I think Tom Cotton is right, but I also think, on balance, it looks like TikTok will still be available at least in the short term to most Americans.
Is there any likelihood? Have you checked out Meta's edits? Is it comparable, or is it not even close, not even in the ballpark in terms of use?
No, well, Meta's being a lot clearer about what it's about its changes, and it's owning them, and it's saying that this is part of our new culture. TikTok has always been quite vague about how it presents itself, how it does business, what its rules are. Not what its rules are. It does have policies, but it's always been a little vaguer in terms of its principles and priorities in terms of what it shows.
Right.
That may be because it has a Chinese owner, or it may just be the way it does business. Maybe just be easier for it to do business. But no, I wouldn't compare the two.
Okay. And just in terms of I suppose, when you're interacting with the TikTok ban, and like, when we see that it changes hands and it goes to a US owner, does that mean then that one law applies for US and then one?
Yeah.
And so there's
basically,
yeah,
that's according to TikTok in Europe. So I interviewed the head of TikTok in Ireland, Elaine Fox. She's the most senior executive here, a few weeks back, and she was pretty adamant on this. She said, no, whatever happens in the States that has no effect on TikTok here in Ireland, Europe. Now, what she meant was that the US can't legislate for Europe. From strictly legal perspective, she's correct. Does that mean that TikTok would not adjust its service, its offering, how its resources stuff, where it sends its data? It's harder to say. I mean, it's spending billions at the moment on this Project Clover, which is supposed to be a bunch of data centers, which separates the data from your TikTok account from ever being able to be accessible anywhere in China. Okay, that's the thing that it has done to try and reassure Western lawmakers that there isn't undue Chinese influence on TikTok algorithms or accounts or data, personal data. Would it continue in that vein with that enthusiasm if the Americans ban it? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it has been suggested that it may not be long if the American ban sticks before someone in Europe suggests a ban here. That if you throw a stone in the IT security community here, even in Ireland, you will find people who will say, no, I agree with the Americans. TikTok is an unacceptable risk. Don't forget, we had the National Cybersecurity Centre here 2 years ago issuing that advice that civil servants and public staff shouldn't have it on their smartphones, which was the most watery advice in the history of expert government advice, because it didn't say they couldn't use TikTok. It didn't say that the Taoiseach shouldn't use TikTok. I mean, the Taoiseach uses TikTok all the time.
Yeah.
It just said that they shouldn't have it on their public devices. I think in public offices or something. I can't even remember. The advice was so watery. But the point to it is that there is a strain of thought there among InfoSec circles that TikTok is risky.
Yeah, I think algorithmically, I think there's a defense there that TikTok could proffer. It's like, we're feeding the person their interests, and they could all, because I see that as the bigger security risk.
Yeah, that's the more logical complaint. If you were to have an issue with TikTok in the US, for example, I don't think it would be about the data of individuals using it or their personal data.
Yeah, the photo in the background with the documents showing.
I no, really don't think. I think the main concern, that the more reasonable arguments I have seen against TikTok are that it's so powerful and it's so influential in the US and here as well, by the way. It's such a disseminator of news and opinion, and I see that all the time. Like in our house, we have a 22-year-old in our house, very influenced by what she sees on TikTok, and I don't say that in a negative way. I'm just observing that neutrally as a fact, that because it has 170 million Americans use TikTok, that is a way to get to skew a conversation very subtly one way or the other. It no question is. So if you in good faith believe that the Chinese government might have a secret backdoor into what gets seen and what's not seen, that's a fairer argument, I think.
Yeah. I do have like one caveat with the sort of TikTok ban, and, Trump saying that it's connecting, it's the youth audience, and he doesn't want to lose the youth audience. But I can speak for, people that use TikTok that, if it got banned, unless you're actually a content creator, you move on within 2 weeks. You just download the next thing. It's not.
Yeah, that's a good argument. I mean, we have YouTube, we've got Facebook, Instagram, Reels. I mean, there's quite a lot of short form video alternatives now, largely because Meta has just ripped TikTok off the same way as it rips everyone off. But that being what it is, there are significant alternatives now. You might make an argument that you're concentrating much more power into Mark Zuckerberg's stable in particular. YouTube is probably always going to be the default video service, I would say, but TikTok has kind of become number 2 now, and is, I would say, above Instagram and Facebook certainly in terms of short form video influence. Even as a news organization now, we will often use TikTok related stuff as context or background, or even just for quotes. Somebody who is in the news, they might make a TikTok video explaining their rationale. Much more so than they will do a YouTube video. It's usually Instagram or TikTok that they will make their video on. So yeah, but I agree with you. Like if TikTok gets banned, to be honest, I actually won't notice that much because I don't use TikTok all that much.
You won't be able to put out those videos.
No, I won't be able to put out those videos. Anyway, look, I think hopefully we've explained a little bit and given a bit of context as to what Trump's election as inauguration means in the short term. There's an awful lot more on this, though, and I'm sure we'll come back to it. But for the moment, JJ Clark, who also produced this episode, thank you very much. Gav Hennessy was on sound, and I'm Adrian Weckler, and you've been listening to or watching The Big Tech Show, and we'll talk to you soon.